Sezno, words on hip hop. Some of this is incomplete. A style or genre that really goes down in music history is preordained almost to a period in which it's too big. Like, it's too cool. It has everybody's attention all year long. There's too much money in it, and you have a wide variety of people who are participating in it and profiting off of it, with some of them not earnestly treating it with the respect that the tradition and history deserves. Like, take all that 80s bullshit rock and roll that my parents' generation has always loved the entire time I was growing up. You know what I mean? Like, dad rock, lead singer is a tenor, Hairspray, Cherry Pie, Your Place for classic rock hits. And much of that stuff is truly just like so trite and superficial and misogynistic and materialist, and offers this vague message of like, enjoy yourself. I hear that era of very popular rock music and I'm not impressed. I don't find the message and image of those bands appealing. I don't find them sincere. I find that music to be cheap and replaceable. Like, these hair bands succeeded and exerted considerable influence and made a great deal of money without having to innovate or take risks. Like, they were riding the backs of, simply put, like, more clever bands that came before them. It's almost like the old days of rock and roll toiled so that this fucking hair band could have their hotel parties after serenading an arena with mediocre songs that other bands had already written. And you know, I've gradually understood that those bands were famous not because they were exceptional musicians or that they were supposed to represent the ultimate in rock craftsmanship circa 1985. But at that point, rock as a genre was just like too fucking big, dude. It was a wide enough commercial machine that you had a massive consumer base for unexceptional bands that didn't need to reinvent the wheel. All this, of course, makes a sensitive listener of a genre, I won't say a real listener, but like a thoughtful listener of a genre, say, how did we get to this point? Like, how come you people fall for this shit? There's clearly better than this to be found. Yet, because of the size of the operation and the industry and the social and sexual clout that popular things hold, the consumer base has already revised their view of what is acceptable in that kind of music. And there's enough of them that you can't disagree with them, in spite of the quote-unquote purists who maintain that this new shit going on right now is not acceptable in the genre, and that the cultural tourists that appear on our feeds are in fact deluded and humiliatingly misinformed, and that the style or genre has become corrupted. Not to say that any one person's idea of a genre ever has to be everyone's, but you see these rifts develop in the culture where on paper everybody listens to the same genre, but they have different conceptions of what the genre is and what makes something in that genre worth paying attention to. And neither side can convincingly be argued to be correct. But while artistic style does always change, perhaps the money brings, quite a few idealists who wouldn't show up there if there weren't so many bright lights involved. This sucks because no genre deserves to be represented by its mediocre practitioners. But if you put enough money into something, if you convince enough people to pay attention to something, this will happen. There's going to be mediocrity, and importantly, the mediocrity will feel more and more normal as time goes on. This is where I see hip-hop as being right now. Over the last decade, I feel like I've watched a new wave emerge and then more or less freeze over. Not from lack of creative fire, but like frozen in time. Like the culture does the same shit over and over. And there's no more revelations, and the potential that we were kind of promised a decade ago has sort of let us down. And I'm saying this as a fan, It's like there was something genuinely artistic and moving and beautiful in 2017 when you had all these artists who didn't give a fuck and they sounded like they didn't give a fuck. It's almost like we were promised substance by a bunch of music with no substance. But I guess no substance, unfortunately, became the status quo. When actually, the really moving thing about those artists not giving a fuck was that this new wave was here to take the culture by storm, to erase all the old ways that didn't matter anymore. What they actually did not give a fuck about was the past, and gatekeeping, and injustice, and fascism in all its forms. And that they did, in fact, give a fuck about themselves, and they gave a fuck about us. And what we as a generation have the capacity to say, when we're on the stage of history. We got all these artists who were unlike any we had ever seen before, and it really just yielded a bunch of copycats. And that as fans, we secretly really wanted these new artists to like really exceed our expectations in the long run. Because ideally, one gives a fuck eventually when one is finally ready to give a fuck. Except we got lost in the sauce when not giving a fuck started making our generation a whole lot of fucking money. And that became largely the attitude and the recipe and the blueprint and many people's sincere, innocent understanding of how this works and how this is supposed to work. And really, I think being mediocre is worse for the world than being bad, because mediocrity is good enough that a lot of other people will call it their bare minimum, and that thus produces more mediocrity. And when you convince a whole culture that you can make it big without giving a fuck, you get lots and lots and lots of mediocrity that follows a blueprint. This new approach takes over the commercial domain of the genre. There's too much money, the industry is preoccupied with a couple set things, and we make the same 5 people famous in different bodies every 6 months. And everything feels safe, and whatever year feels like a caricature of the year before. Now, the old heads can't appreciate the new music, and the younger base clown the old heads without knowing the old heads' music. Why would you need to hear Illmatic if you're going to a Netspend show? I'm generalizing, but you see what I mean? And now we maneuver this exhausting debate about what happened and where are all the superstars, and our favorite songs become a decade old. It's like a search for authenticity that never ends. And we're left in this 24-hour museum of TikTok curiosities, where the main differences between everybody are surface level. It's hair and weight and skin and bones and drug of choice. Hip-hop has successfully become entertainment. It has been and continues to be terrifically entertaining. Maybe one way I'd put it is it's gotten too entertaining. And when something is entertaining enough, it brings a lot of people who are just there to be entertained. You know what I mean? This all might sound really negative, but I think it's okay that a style or genre gets to this point. It's a clear indicator of its cultural power, at the very least. It's not even really about the art form. It's like the extent of its influence on like human culture at this point in history. It's not like all the sensitive, creative people in hip-hop all just fucking disappeared one morning and like sold out. And any artistic style that successfully combines newness and commercial viability is like a miracle. But it's a point at which a genre changes forever and breeds debates and splinters off or becomes niche or is adopted into something else. Like I said, I think it's okay that hip-hop is at this point, you know. This is not intended as an elegy. We are in the age of hip-hop. I think we've been in the age of hip-hop my entire life. There's a surprising number of older people who don't seem to have noticed this at all. Is this a crisis moment? I don't know. Not necessarily. The whole debate about like hip-hop songs not being as much in the charts, in the top charts, like the uppermost charts, that doesn't feel too relevant to me. But I do think that hip-hop going more underground leaves room for creativity to emerge. I'm sure that hip-hop is evolving, but if it is, it's not happening on the main stage. But the most influential main stage acts that we've been barraged with over the last decade, most of them would have you think that hip-hop is still where it was 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. I'm starting to feel about newer, more popular hip-hop the way that I feel about the hair bands I discussed. Of like, this doesn't move me because it feels insincere. It feels like you're riding a wave that somebody was much braver in taking than you. And your songs are about how you're better than everyone else. And better off than everyone else. I love hip-hop, but I think a lot of people can start to say like they're not falling for that anymore. Something in the attitude needs to change. Something in people's intentions need to change. It needs to get less big. It needs to get out of the spotlight at some point to better encourage the people to work with it that really truly believe in it and can contribute something meaningfully to a deep tradition.